Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome to my series on the great Hank Mobley. He's truly one of my favorite artists. I'm a huge fan. There's an integrity to his playing. There's never any sense of him trying to follow the trends or to be something other than what he is. And he was, of course, a Georgia boy, thus I'm wearing this old Pistol Pete Atlanta Hawks. He came up to New York, New Jersey area, went to school there for a while, studied music, a lot on his own. And it was, of course, in New York, in Newark, New Jersey, where he gets his first break to record. But we're going to discuss his discography today and a lot of his impacts. He was known as the middleweight champion of the tenor saxophone. I believe it was Leonard Feather who coined that term. I think a lot of people kind of almost overlooked him, yet that name was in no way meant as a second place tier champion. He was absolutely one of the great motors of the hard bop era. His tone has this creamy richness and emotion to it that I never tire of. Coltrane can be just over the top sometimes. Mobley's always connected directly to his tone and his melody and expressing from a place of warmth and solace. I can't really, like I say, express enough how Mobley is an important figure. I think in a lot of ways Mobley's a barometer. When you talk to someone who says, "Oh, I'm a big jazz guy," and then you say, "Oh, you like Hank Mobley," and they don't know Hank Mobley, they don't really know jazz. They know some Ella, some Louis, some Miles, and they think they're into jazz. So I've found many times that if you want to know how deep someone's knowledge in jazz goes, mention the name Hank Mobley. And if they can tell you about Mobley and have a favorite Mobley record and at least know the name, they're pretty entrenched in the jazz. If they don't know who Hank Mobley is, they're a beginner. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you are a beginner, Hank Mobley's a great place to start. Don't jump into Miles and don't jump into Coltrane and don't jump into Mingus before you get into Mobley. Mobley is so much more accessible, so much more enjoyable in all moods and all instances. He never gets avant-garde, he never gets edgy. It's always a nice, round, safe, warm fire to sit by. Of course, he's a Jazz Messenger alum, and we did a great series on the Jazz Messages, which I should put a link to below this. But I'm going to show you real quick, again, some of his work with the Messengers. This is his great album on Columbia. There's the young Hank Mobley. You can see there's a tenderness, a seeking, but a gentleness to him, just via that image. He, of course, is a member still here, doing this great stuff with the Messenger, Art Blakey and company. Then he gets a chance to do a recording session of his own, and this was initially a 10-inch on Blue Note from probably 54, 55, and it's a nice recording. Has Horace Silver, Doug Watkins, Art Blakey. So again, you're talking, it's Jazz Messenger-ish. Great stuff, worth seeking out. But as I said, he was a New Jersey guy in his teens, and it's Newark's Savoy label that gives him his first shot to record. And this is the jazz message of, and there's a photo of Mobley there. And let's not construe this. This was not really a Hank Mobley album. This was the jazz message of Donald Byrd, Hank Mobley, Horace Silver, Doug Watkins, John Laporta, Ronnie Ball, Wendell Marshall, Kenny Clark. But it's been now considered a Mobley record, in part because there's photos on it, in part because he's a sax player, which is often the first guy to get credit for leading a session, sax or trumpet. But it's a great early look into Mobley. It's a beautiful old Savoy record. These old Savoy, especially the Mobley, Lee Morgendahl, and Byrd stuff, are not cheap. These are expensive records. You can pay $100 for a not very good copy of that. It goes for $300-400 frequently. The Japanese presses go for $700-800. It's crazy. Shortly after that session at Savoy. He's given the session at Prestige. Once again, he's got his friend Dahlberg on it, who he knew through Savoy. Jackie McLean, Barry Harris, Doug Watkins, and Art Taylor. So again, Watkins shows up again. This is a great record. One of my favorite hard bop records on Prestige. And Prestige doesn't have the consistency of Blue Note in any way, but this is a shining example of the hard bop movement that was happening in 56, 57, 58, into the early 60s. Well, it's an OJC pressing. Again, originals here can go for hundreds of dollars. Great stuff. They follow that one up shortly in the next year with Mobley's Second Message. Kenny Dorham, Walter Bishop, Doug Watkins, and Art Taylor. Again, a tough record to find. Originals can fetch a couple $100 easy. Another OJC. And then what we're listening to right now was his second record on Savoy. Again, from 56, 57. Again, Jazz Message #2. So it wasn't technically a Hank Mobley record, but for all intents and purposes and for all collectors at this point, this is considered a Hank Mobley album. Again, a great picture of him there. Mobley, Lee Morgan, Dahlberg, Hank Jones, who I'm a huge fan of, Barry Harris, Doug Watkins, Kenny Clark, and Art Taylor. So my guess is that was recorded from 2 different sessions. And again, at this point, it's considered Hank Mobley stuff. So that kind of wraps up his pre-Blue Note era. And again, he's done some Jazz Messenger stuff at Blue Note already, but now he's given a contract to Blue Note where he spends most of the rest of his career. And it's prolific. Not only as a leader, but as a sideman. No matter how great his star ascends, he stays very willing to record with his buddies throughout the history of Blue Note in the 50s and 60s. And I'm going to cover most of his side work and most of his albums as a leader. I have all the ones that were released at the time. There's a number of sessions that were put in the back vaults and have been issued by the Japanese and by others later in the 80s and 90s. And I have a lot of that stuff too. There's a few titles I don't have, like Poppin', Curtain Call, Workout, a second workout, I don't have that one. A lot of that's going to be alternate takes. I'm going to get it eventually. You only have so many records. Do what you can. First of all, there's this little debut session I forgot about. On Debut Records, which of course was a subsidiary of Fantasy, Mingus was in Fantasy's era, but doing an imprint that had a little bit more jazz to it than what Fantasy was doing. And if I recall, somehow Mingus's wife was related to the people at Fantasy, and they ended up buying Debut from Mingus. But the initial 15 or so records that were on Debut are some really quality, small, hard to find jazz records. I think this was a 10-inch initially. It's got, of course, the great Max Roach on it. Well, it's actually a Max Roach session. Great stuff. And even at this early age, Hank Mobley is defining his tone and his sound. Now we're going to look at some of the side work he does here in 55 and 56. And it's pretty prolific. J.J. Johnson, the great trombone player. This is volume 2. This session has Mobley on most of the tracks. Again, Horace Silver. When he leaves the Jazz Messengers, Hank Mobley and Watkins go with him initially. And 55, 56, there's like 3 records Horace Silver does that has a beautiful, beautifully young but mature Hank Mobley on them. Great record. You saw this, of course, in the Jazz Messenger series. Again, because the Messengers were on Columbia for a brief moment, Epic was a subsidiary, so they gave Horace Silver his own record on Epic, and Mobley's on this as well. I think with Watkins as well, if I recall. I don't see them listing there. 6 Pieces of Silver. Gorgeous old record. This is original pressing. Beautiful stuff. Beautiful, nice, heavy cover. None of my original Blue Notes are going to be in pristine condition. I'm not that guy. I get the music. If I can get an old copy, I'm happy to do so. But beautiful cover. Reed Miles. Wonderful stuff. In fact, recall Watkins is still on this as well. Yep, Louis Hayes is a young man on the drums. And Donald Byrd is also, again, at the right-hand side of Hank Mobley, which is a connection you're going to see a lot. The stylings of silver, another old Blue Note. This was bought by some guy in San Antonio, Texas in 1958. Louis Hayes again, Teddy Kotick on bass. Art Farmer fills the trumpet chair on this one. And Farmer's a wonderful, creamy tone player who actually is a great empath next to Mobley. They're both wonderfully creamy tone players. These records by Silver are fairly tough to come by. Not as tough as the Mobley records. Back to Savoy again. This is going to be Lee Morgan's debut as a solo artist, and you're going to see he brings in Hank Williams to do the session with him, along with Hank Jones, Doug Watkins, and Art Taylor. So there's going to be a lot of that lineage of player throughout this stuff. Of course, the Japanese pressing. Another one I'd like to get original pressing, but goes for hundreds of bucks. Afro-Cuban, the great Kenny Dorham. Mobley contributes to this record. Initially it was a 10-inch, came out in 54, I believe, and then they reissued it on the 12-inch when the 1500 series launches. Great stuff, worth finding. And I find Kenny Dorham to be somewhere between the fire of a Morgan and the chill of an Art Farmer. So Mobley's willing to work with a lot of different range musicians, and Mobley's also that guy that will be nudged by who's playing around him. If you're playing Cream, he's going to play Cream. If you're playing Fire, he's going to turn the heat up. He's wonderful in that sense. Another Dahlberg record. This was on Transition, a short-term label. Watkins was on here as well. And you see Mobley and Bird side by side pretty consistently. A lot of this is Jazz Messenger tree. And we can see now, just in the records we're showing you, how dramatic the Hard Bop lineage is in connection with the Jazz Messengers and Art Blakey. This is all stuff that springs from the fruit of that tree. Here's another Transition record. This is Doug Watkins at large. It's got Mobley, Bird, Burrell, Duke Jordan, and Art Taylor. Art Taylor seems to show up a lot in Hard Bop in the late 50s. Great drummer, great storyteller from what I'm told. Love Kenny Burrell as well. Prestige has this thing called Tenor Conclave, and it's got Al Cohn, love him, Zoot Sims, love him, young John Coltrane, who's still very much developing, and of course Hank Mobley. And I think all four of these guys, Coltrane's probably the least established at this point, but they're all fairly young in their careers, so they kind of do this little blowing session. Here's a record he does with Art Farmer on the New Jazz imprint from 1957, I believe. Nice record, tough to find. And this leads me to another point I've discovered. If you're looking for a record by an artist, and this one record of theirs is almost twice as expensive as most of their other records. And I came across this numerous times, and I'll point some of them out when I get to them. This is one of them. This record was way more expensive than most Art Farmers, and it turns out the reason why is because Hank Mobley's on this record. And Hank Mobley fans are completists. They want everything Mobley did, and doesn't matter whose session it was. If Hank Mobley's on it, that record's going to be more expensive than most of the other records that artists released. All Night Long, this has been attributed to Kenny Burrell in the years that have followed. This was technically just kind of a Prestige all-star session. Bird, Richardson, Burrell, Mobley. Great record. It's one of those records you can just put on a dark night when you're laying back with a glass of wine, just relaxing. And the last record I want to show you from 55, 54, 55, 56 is this fantastic informal jazz record by the great piano player Elmo Hope. Again, a fantastic lineup. One of my favorite Prestige records as well is this one. I mentioned this before, I think, in the Coltrane series I did. This record is outstanding. It's one of the more intense hard bop sessions that you'll hear on Prestige. and one of the more focused sessions. I find some Prestige stuff can be a little directionless. And that's not to say it's not great, because you can see live jazz, it can be directionless because there's not the focus of a center point, a leader, and a studio that's trying to make a record that sounds a certain way. And a lot of Prestige stuff just sounds a little haphazard and not focused. This is a great Prestige record. So this wraps up episode 1 on Hank Mobley. Just tune in for my second episode. There's going to be 4 in total, and we're going to cover the late 50s in the next episode. A prolific time for Hank. I'm the Jazz Shepherd. Subscribe to the channel. Peace.